What's up, people, and welcome back to the I Am Conquering Mountains podcast. I'm your host, I Am Conquering Mountains. And today, as we continue to tackle our theme this year, I Am Conquering Childhood Trauma, I believe it's always good to get the experts on this subject, not just those who are working in the field and helping individuals through counseling, mentoring, therapy, and things of that nature to conquer childhood trauma and experiences they have experienced, but also to get those who have experienced it firsthand. And we have a wonderful, wonderful, and inspiring guest joining the show today. She is one of the most inspiring individuals you can find on social media. She is the host of her very own podcast titled Trauma Chats with Mackenzie. She is a survivor of child sex abuse. Through her podcast and social media presence, she hopes to provide a great deal of support by empowering, inspiring, and educating fellow survivors. She also provides a great deal of insight for those who are allies, for those who have experienced sexual trauma as well. And here to share her experience and to provide some insight on how to conquer childhood trauma, especially conquering sex abuse as a child, we have a wonderful guest, Miss Mackenzie Mae.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm so grateful for this opportunity, and yeah, I'm just so excited to get into it with you. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining.
of course.
How is the podcast going?
It's good. Yeah, I was super consistent for probably like 3 to 4 months starting out, and it started to get a little bit triggering at times. So I kind of took a little step back.
Uh-oh. Froze again. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we're back.
I don't know what happened. All right. You want to do that again?
I mean, I thought your intro was so good. Can you like cut through it, or should we restart?
We can start with the question. I'll keep recording because I can always go back and edit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
So I actually have taken a little bit of a break from recording podcasts the last maybe month or so, just because it was getting a little triggering sometimes. I really go deep into these things. They're very personal, and I want to be as real as possible. And so, yeah, I'm definitely intend to keep creating. I've just kind of taken a little bit of a step back to kind of find that balance for myself again. But yeah, I love it.
That's good. That's awesome. That's awesome that, because even with, this podcast as well, I did take a break for a while after the first season because I wanted to kind of reevaluate. And also I was trying to get back into therapy to work through some things from my childhood that was still impacting me. So I think it's good to recognize when you need that break, and I think that's very courageous of you to take that break as well too, to recognize that in yourself.
Thank you.
So tell me, before we dive into your story, tell me, what is a typical day like for you when you're at your best, but also like when you're not so much at your best? And I ask that question because I find myself like I have PTSD, social anxiety disorder, and depression as well. So there's days where I'm really, really good and I can be really, really good for a long time. But then there's those days where either I get triggered or something happens and it feels kind of like a setback where I'm not at my best. So tell me, what is a typical day like for you when you're at your best, but then like a not so a good day for you as well?
All right. Yeah, I definitely relate to that. There are days that I just wake up feeling super anxious for no reason, seemingly. But there are also days that I'm feeling great. So I'd say on a typical, like at my best day, I start with my morning routine. I like to get up around like 7 a.m., start the day. I love doing morning yoga, doing my morning gratitude journaling. It really puts me in a good mindset for the rest of the day. I think moving my body, waking it up slowly and gently helps me a lot to get in tune with myself first before, I go out into the day and do all the things that I want to do. I also love time blocking. It helps me like take away the anxiety of trying to figure out what I need to do. I'm just like, oh, got it scheduled out. We're good to go. This is what I do.
Nice.
Yeah. And then I guess at night, I just wind down. I love making dinner with my partner and just watching a show or reading a book, something like that. So that's like ideal. Maybe watching the sunset as well. I love the sunset.
Nice. Especially at California sunset.
Yes, it's beautiful. On a not so great day, I really curated my morning routine to be very gentle and simple for those days that I'm not doing as well, so that I can still, get into the day as best I can. So if I'm able to, I will do that. There are days that, I can't get out of bed easily, and I'll just kind of do whatever my body needs. I really just try to listen into what I need and go throughout my day as best I can. Just knowing that the next day I'll wake up and we'll be okay.
And you mentioned something called time blocking. Can you explain what time blocking is?
Yeah, so I have my schedule. I love it's like connected with my laptop and my phone, and I just time block things because usually I feel like things are going to take so long. And so when I really time block things, I can be like, okay, like I really do think I've given myself enough time for this. And, also just prioritizing, helping me prioritize. So I just kind of block it out and I color code it. It makes it kind of fun.
Nice. I need to use that because sometimes I can get like very overwhelmed by all the hustle and bustle of the things that I got to do. And I'm like doing one thing, but I remember I got to do another thing. So then I get like all chaotic and trying to bounce from place to place. So I just need to just block off time to just do this one little thing. So thank you for sharing that. I definitely will add that to my repertoire as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So when you think about trauma, right, you host your podcast, the Trauma Chat podcast, when you think about trauma, like how would you define it?
So trauma to me is either an event, an experience, or a set of experiences over time that really deeply impact someone and impact their well-being for long after that trauma experience has happened. I think what really made it click for me, and I'm going to try to say this as elegantly as possible, just to paint a picture, is like, I think of trauma as an internal wound. And so think about an external wound, you have to tend to it. You have to go to a doctor to get it healed or, put Neosporin on it, a bandage. And so with internal wounds, with trauma, you have to go in and heal it. So you need to find sources outside of yourself, like a doctor, a therapist, something like that, so that you can really dig deep and bring it to the surface so that it can scar over. So it'll always be with you, but you can heal it and it won't be as big of an open wound, I guess. And, for years, I just tried to act like it wasn't there. And if you act like an external wound isn't there, it's just going to get infected or spread. And so that's kind of what happened. And I think my healing journey started once I was like, okay, I'm going to go into this wound and really try to heal it and find those resources to heal it. So that makes sense. That's kind of
it does. Yeah, I love that because like those internal wounds aren't on the outward appearance where people can actually see what you've been through. It's like dealing with childhood trauma myself. I have a lot of internal wounds as well where they may rear their ugly heads in my behavior or in my character or what I say, but people don't always see the hidden things behind that, and people don't always people can't look at you and tell what it is that you've been through. until we open up and share those things. But I love looking at it as an internal wound instead of an external wound, because external wounds, you can see them, they're reminders and things of that nature, but then you have those internal scars that of how things have impacted you emotionally, psychologically, things of that nature, even with our health wise. But we can't always see those wounds that people recognize. And I think that's so important because you never know what someone's been through. So I think
Exactly.
it's important to be very empathetic to everyone because you never know like what someone has endured. So thank you for sharing that as well. That was beautiful.
Thank you, of course.
Mhm. So can you tell us what CSA stands for and what that means to you?
So CSA stands for Child Sexual Abuse or Childhood
Mhm.
Sexual Abuse. And to my understanding, it is any type of sexual interaction with a minor or someone under the age of 18, whether it be touching or not touching, and it could be by another minor or an
Mhm.
adult. So these things could include any type of sexual, physical advances, or it could include sexual talk in person or virtually, even through text or video chat. It could be someone exposing themselves to a child or forcing a child to expose themselves to someone. It could be taking inappropriate pictures of a child. And those are just some of the examples. It's very much more broad than I think a lot of people think. So I think a lot of people
Mhm.
go towards the more touch, like physical ones, but it's
Right.
definitely expands to non-touch, any type of, interaction that is sexual in nature. And I
And
think
that's a,
yeah, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think what's also important to note when talking about like kind of the definition of child sexual abuse is not only what happens during that abuse, but the incredibly horrible impacts that come from it
Mm,
that are lifelong, including some of the things you were talking about too, like depression, PTSD, anxiety, eating disorders, and the list goes on.
yeah.
So I guess that's what CSA means to me.
That's important to note because I think a lot of people do, as soon as they go hear child sex abuse or childhood sexual abuse or child sex trauma, the first thing that comes to mind is something that's related to touching,
Hmm.
where there's sex with a minor, inappropriate touching, things of that nature. But I think it's also important to note that those things can be non-touching as well too. So do you find that, within that community and people that you may have interviewed and stuff for your podcast and things of that nature, do you find that a lot of people don't recognize that they have been sexually abused as a child, even though they weren't being touched?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I've or talked about with other survivors where they didn't realize that they'd endured child sexual abuse because they were never touched in a certain way. But, years later, they learned like, oh, I wasn't supposed to be, communicating with an adult like this. Like that was sexual abuse. Even though, yeah. So yes, definitely.
Right. Yeah, yeah. That definitely can, because I work as a school counselor and at a middle school level. I've been a middle school counselor for the past 6, 7 years now. And there's a lot of things that happen to our young people that they don't quite understand. Even at my age, and you may can attest to this as well as with the experience that you had as well, where these things happen to us and we just don't know that this is not supposed to be happening.
Hmm.
And that can make it all the more hard. Do you find that it hits home a little bit for people once they recognize, like, oh my goodness, I was abused as a kid?
Definitely. I think once someone realizes that, then they kind of spiral back into their past and they think about, oh, like this interaction or this way that I am or
Yeah.
whatever might be explained by something that happened in the past. So, yeah, I think it definitely opens up the floodgates there.
Mhm. And with child sex abuse, what makes it hard for a child to share what's happening? Like, what are some of the things that keep a child from sharing what's happening to them?
Good question. There are several barriers that get in the way of a child disclosing their abuse. Oftentimes, a child knows the person who is abusing them. I think the statistic is around like 90 to 95% of survivors knew their.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's not, just some stranger. It's someone that they trust. It's someone that they may love. And so with that can come, they don't want to get that person in trouble. They trust that person and don't actually think anything is going wrong. They think they're going to get in trouble. A lot of abusers will tell children and brainwash them that, no one's going to believe them. They're going to be the ones that are in trouble, like so many things along that. And so that terrifies children to tell anyone. If they're told no one's going to believe you, or yeah. And a lot of kids also think it's their fault, or they don't know it's happening to anyone else. So they think, I guess this is just something that happens, so I think, yeah, there's several barriers. That's just scratching the surface, honestly.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Also, so like, cause I think is just thinking about like traumatic experiences you go through in life, we can tend to normalize those things as well. And I think also, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, also with kids being sexually abused, can it come to a point where they start to normalize that, oh, this is something that's supposed to be happening?
Yeah, definitely. I think with my experience, right from the jump, I was like, I know something's off. I know if my parents saw what was happening, they wouldn't approve of it. But, it's an adult. It's, I'm supposed to respect authority and follow directions. And so over time, it was just like, well, I guess this is just like what's going to happen. I don't know. Yeah. So I definitely think that a lot of survivors experience that too.
Yeah. And how old were you, if you don't mind me asking, when the abuse started?
I was 9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. It was,
Man.
I don't know if you want me to tell how it started, but
Sure. If you can share as much as you want.
okay, yeah. Yeah, I was 9 years old, and it actually started because my Taekwondo instructor wanted to do a competition with me specifically. It was two of us, and he created a routine for us where we would stay after practice a lot in our one-on-one kind of trainings, and would just leave sometimes to get us drinks from the gas station or like snacks, and that's kind of where it started.
Mhm. So this
Yeah.
is your karate and your Taekwondo instructor,
Yes.
and you're 9 years old and you're having a Taekwondo practice, and then like, did he always work with you one-on-one, or was this kind of like something that kind of segued into more one-on-one sessions with you?
Yeah, it segued into more one-on-one. At first, it was, Taekwondo was always my like greatest passion. It was my whole life. I loved it with my whole being. And I think he saw that, and I was going out of my way to do more and more with Taekwondo. So I think that was one factor into like his decision, I guess.
Yeah. When did you realize, like, hey, this is the guy that's doing something to me that is not supposed to be happening?
Good question. Yeah, like I said, I think the whole time I knew this wasn't right, but I didn't know I wasn't the only one, I guess.
Okay.
When I was 13, I ended up watching this TV show that I loved, and a girl in there disclosed her abuse to a friend, and it was so similar to what I was. And just a light bulb clicked. I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm not the only one. This is wrong. And it encouraged me to do more research on it. About a month later is when I finally disclosed.
And you told your friend?
I did, yeah.
And what was the friend's reaction?
So it was interesting. I was actually in the car going to a training with my abuser. It was just him and I. He had just given me a rose and told me how much he loved me. He would always force me to tell him that I loved him as well. And I was fed up with it. So I started texting my friend in the car while he was getting gas, I think, because I was scared he would see it. So I like quickly texted
Oh,
her.
you're riding with him.
I was with him.
Oh,
It was
wow.
right after I was given these things and told these things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just about to go to a 2-hour training just like with him. So anyways, yeah, I texted her really quickly and didn't really conversate that much, but it kind of just told her what was happening. And I asked her to promise not to tell anyone. I wanted to tell my parents later. But thankfully, I'm so grateful she did. She ended up telling my mom, telling her mom, which told my mom, and the
Yeah,
rest is it. But yeah.
that's a great friend. That's a great friend.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, yeah. Do you guys still talk?
We do periodically.
Good.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna tell my students, they will come to me and say that they have a friend that, you know, this is happening to them, or their mother put them out last night, or they were abused last night, or just domestic violence in the home and things of that nature. And they don't want this other student that they're talking about to find out it was them that said anything. And we don't disclose that anyway because of confidentiality. I think sometimes kids put like 2 and 2 together, that, you know, who said something, but we don't disclose it as counselors. But often we'll tell those kids that I would rather your friend be mad at you for telling and sharing what's happening to them to get it to stop, than for them to be happy with you that you didn't say anything. Because who knows what could happen? You know, anything could happen, and then you have to live with that guilt of not saying something. So if you're listening out there and your child is telling you something about a friend that they have that is being abused, please act on it. Don't ignore it. Don't put it to the side. Don't wait till the next day. Go ahead and act on it. So I wanted to ask you, so you were 9 years old when it started, 13 when you said something. What was it like when you knew you had to go to Taekwondo practice? Like, it's this time of the week, it's on these certain days, leading up to that day, like, where's your mind at?
This is a super interesting question because I trained with him for up to 6 days a week. And on top of that, our families were very close. He really groomed me, not only me, but my entire family. And so we would have several events outside of Taekwondo, like birthday parties. He even came over for Christmas one year. He would stay the night with his 4 kids and his wife sometimes.
Wow.
He would invite me to his family events with his entire family, 4 hours away. And we would also go to tournaments across the country frequently. And so I really couldn't get out of it. Taekwondo was my entire life, and he was part of Taekwondo. So it wasn't really, what would I say or how did I feel before Taekwondo practice? It was really like all the time. It was a never-ending anxiety of, when is he going to convince my parents to let me stay over at his house so I can help with the kids? Or when is he going to invite me on a different trip to go with him so that he can do whatever? So, yeah.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Additionally, he had me assistant teach with him at several different locations. So it would be 2 to 3 times a week. I would drive multiple times, at least an hour away, to go train with him or help him teach. And then in the summer, I would also help with summer camps. Just him. So it was a lot.
Wow. So, like, did the abuse happen outside of, like, when you went on the trips with him and you helped him out at his house with his kids and spent the night there? Did the abuse continue?
Yes, that's where most of the abuse would happen. It started at the Taekwondo studio when we would do our one-on-ones. But then, he basically, I loved his kids, so I wanted to be around them. But then he used as like a reason for me to get over there, and would abuse me like in their basement and kick his kids out of the basement and lock the door.
Mhm.
Or, on competitions, he would bring me to the hotel room and lock the other kids out of the room. Um,
Wow.
and even at his own parents' house, he would take me away. It was like a summer type lake house. He would
Mhm.
take me away from everyone and bring me back up to the house to abuse me. So it
Mercy.
was really everywhere.
So you really couldn't escape this from happening.
No,
Wow. Did you feel trapped then?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So like like when you go to school and like this abuse is happening, like how are you able to function in school and stuff?
Well, I think that it really made me into a perfectionist in school,
Mm,
actually. It made me want to, get attention maybe through, being the smart kid. And so
mhm,
I, yeah, I would do everything I could to get all A's. Like if I didn't get A's, I would
mm,
beat myself up for hours.
yeah,
And, I just really threw myself into my studies and tried to, I don't know, be best at, I don't know, at
yeah.
everything, I guess. But whenever I ended up disclosing after seventh grade and eighth grade, I ended up actually doing worse in school. I was really
Mhm.
in my head about it all. And I don't know, it was tough also keeping it a secret from everyone.
I imagine that, having to live through that, you're training 6 days a week and going, having to go to his house and having to go on these trips and, these things are going to happen and stuff like that. So, like, I can imagine the amount of suffering that you had to deal with during that time.
Hmm.
And I asked that question about like school and stuff because as a counselor, we often have these conversations with kids who are being sexually abused. And it happens like the night before, and then they still have to come to school and function the next day. So one of the things I often will tell teachers is, if the kid is acting out in the classroom, consider that it's not because of you. And if you're a teacher listening or an educator listening, or if you work with kids in general, daycare, after school, before school activities, coaching, sports, things of that nature, if a kid is responding to you in a way that you don't like, consider that there may be something else that's happening. Because sometimes kids will act out because something has triggered them or something, or they're looking to get someone's attention to make sure that they can have that trusted adult that they can disclose those things with. So if you're an adult that's listening, please make sure that if the kid is acting out, if the kid is reaching out to you, don't turn them away, don't ignore them, don't just send them to the principal's office or put them out the class. Try to build that relationship with them. So like back then, did you have any trusted adults that you knew you could share this with?
So the thing is, like, my parents were always and always have been the most supportive, compassionate, kind people I've ever met.
Mhm,
And I know that if I would have told them, they would have, supported me 100%.
mhm,
However, because they were so kind and compassionate, I had always seen other things affect them. And
mhm,
me being how I am, I didn't want to make them upset. And
mhm,
so that I think was a really big reason I didn't say anything to them.
mhm.
And other than that, like I had several adults in my life. Like my friends' parents were always amazing to me. I have all older siblings, like way older, so I could have talked to them. But yeah,
Mhm.
I was too scared. I didn't, yeah.
I imagine so, especially like you talked about like grooming and like this person probably has a good perception in your parents' eyes and in your siblings' eyes. And, it could even be a case where if you did say something, would they believe because they trust this person so much,
Yeah.
especially if they're letting you go hours away on a trip and things of that nature. Were your parents like was there ever a situation where the abuse was happening when your parents was around and they didn't, and like if you guys were at a function together and things of that nature, was there ever a time where that took place?
I mean, it's hard to remember, honestly. I think most of the time it was in like more easily private places, or as I was saying at the beginning, when I was doing these trainings one-on-one with him, my mom would leave. It would be like during that time. So I don't think things did happen when they were around specifically. I know things did happen when other adults were around, specifically his parents, his siblings, and his wife.
So then, like, you tell your friend when you're 13, your friend tells her mom tells your mom. At what point did you find out that your friend had shared what you had shared?
So I told her on the way to this training, where actually I was going to meet my dad there as well, because he did this class. It was like over an hour away. And I basically, we're driving home, my dad and I, after that. And my mom meets my dad. Once we get home, my mom brings my dad aside and I go to bed because it's late. So basically, she told everything to my dad, and they ended up waking me up and bringing me straight to the police station. They still didn't say anything to me about it. They just said, something has happened and we have to go to the police station. And so my first time kind of telling my parents was in front of the police officer that asked if I knew why I was there. And I said,
did you kind of figure out, did you put two and two together about like when they say you're going to the police station? Did you have a thought that was,
I was just sitting in the back seat with just like overwhelming like dread, but also a sense of relief that I had finally said something, and I was actually relieved that my friend had told her mom.
And what was like your parents were in the police station with you as you were sharing those things? And how intimidating is that, in going into a police station and having to share what's happening to you, especially at 13?
It was horrible.
I can imagine.
On top of going to the police station, it was also after I had school that day and the training. It was pretty much midnight by this time. And I started to talk a little bit about it, and my dad had to, actually, no, I think I asked my dad if he could leave because I didn't want him to hear this. So it's just my mom and I and the police officer, and it was a very raw and real moment with my parents, especially my mom. I don't believe the whole situation was handled correctly, honestly, with the police station, unfortunately. But it was hard.
Well, kudos to your parents for acting on that right away, because especially with like I guess like a close friend of the family, even though they could have said, well, no, let's find out, let's talk to him first. No, let's go straight to the police station and report this. And I'm proud of your parents for doing that. Even though they had to wake you up at midnight and take you down there, I'm glad that they acted on that right away. Because I can't tell you how many kids in this world will share something that's happening to them with their parents and not be, or with their caregivers and not be believed. So I'm glad that your parents, did believe you and take you right down to the police station to report it. And what happened after you reported it?
So I believe like the next week or so, I was brought to the Child Advocacy Center and talked to an investigative interviewer. I was also visited by Child Services in my home and offered therapy. All in this time as well, my mom was working really hard to ensure, try to to get justice and like
Yeah,
figure
yeah.
out what that kind of plan is, as well as getting a restraining order against him.
Hmm.
So it was very surreal. Like, it's hard to even remember. I feel like I was just floating by, like, very
Yeah.
dissociated for a while. And actually, it was, yeah, I ended up changing almost everything about my appearance at that time as well. I
Hmm.
stopped wearing my glasses. I changed my hair, like my part in my hair. I redid my
Hmm.
entire bedroom and just changed my whole wardrobe as well because I did
Hmm.
not want to be recognizable. I don't know. It was a weird time.
Yeah, this really impacted you a lot. Like I can, especially like changing your appearance and things of that nature, switching things around. Did you ever struggle with like the memory of those things and trying to do anything to make yourself forget what had took place?
Yes, I struggle with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and
Mm,
so I've struggled a lot with nightmares, flashbacks, a lot of triggers, anxiety, depression, all these things, and eating disorder.
mm,
I think that what helped me, honestly, is I threw myself into school, which helped, but also made me even more perfectionist. And I also threw myself into band. I was a
Oh,
little
okay.
and that really took up a lot of my time as well as work. So I just really filled my schedule. I could not be alone whatsoever for
Mhm.
like years.
Yeah,
After,
yeah. So
um,
you had a lot of positive outlets that you could utilize.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
I had a lot
good,
of
good.
great support around me, which was so, so important. I can't even tell you how grateful I am for my parents, my friends, my
Yeah,
loved ones.
yeah. So did you go to like therapy or anything after you had shared what happened?
Yeah. So I just I would not accept therapy.
Mm,
Right when I was offered, my parents were really trying to encourage me, and I just
mhm,
kept shutting them down. I, yeah, I did not want to talk about it. I just wanted to act like it didn't exist. And
yeah.
so basically, until I was 17, then I finally was like, okay, there's an issue here. I was heavily struggling with everything I just talked about.
Mhm,
And I ended up having a really big breakdown, went to my parents, and I was like, I need help. Like, I need to see a doctor right now. So the
yeah.
next morning, they brought me in. I was put on anxiety medication, and I still didn't even start therapy until college when I was 18,
Mm,
which eventually, yeah, that was the best decision. And,
yeah.
everyone can say, I wish I would have done this sooner, but, everything works out how it does. So,
Yeah, with therapy you go in, yeah, you may need it right away, but I think you have to be prepared for it as well. Because there's a lot of, those inner scars that we talked about earlier, that you mentioned earlier, those internal wounds. You have to be prepared to go in and acknowledge those things and heal those things and address things that have happened to you. And that's not always a it can be scary, so as long as I'm glad that you went when you were ready. Because it might
yeah,
not be as effective going when someone tells you to.
exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Because it's definitely going to hurt worse before it gets
Mhm.
better.
Absolutely, absolutely. You guys hear that? Therapy, it may hurt worse. It's like surgery. I had back surgery a couple years ago, and not to scare anyone from going to therapy. I definitely want you to go to therapy, but I definitely want to make sure you understand that you're gonna unpack some things, and it could hurt a little bit, as you go into it. So I'm not gonna share the back surgery story. I don't want to scare anyone. But you had mentioned that, if we can go back for a second, you had mentioned that um, the case wasn't handled the way you thought it should have. What was the outcome of the case, of the investigation?
Yeah. So basically, nothing happened. I got a restraining order until I was 18. And my mom was really diving deep on this. She was doing everything she could. She was going to court. But as I said, I didn't want anything to do with it. And so she did not want to put her 13-year-old through going to court and being in front of her abuser, talking about this in front of people. And so without that, and there was a preponderance of evidence, I believe it's called. However, yeah, it just didn't end up being enough to get justice. So, and thankfully now in Missouri, at least the statute of limitations has lifted, so I can still
nice.
go and try to seek justice still. However, yeah, at this point in my life, I'm not interested yet. However, I have thought about it for in the future. It's just, yeah, it's going to bring up things again even more, and potentially seeing him again. And I don't know if you know the book Know My Name by Chanel Miller.
No, I don't. I'm definitely going to look it up though.
Yeah, she made an incredible memoir about her experience being sexually assaulted in college, and or going to a college, and then her experience, I guess, through the justice system. And it really opened my eyes to the possibilities there. So anyways, anyone listening, I suggest you read Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Very interesting.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for that. Definitely will look that up, because that can be very intimidating, like having to confront your abuser in a courtroom, especially like just being in the courtroom can be quite intimidating, but then having to actually confront and point out your abuser and talk about those things while they're like death staring at you, that could be quite intimidating. So I can understand, the reservation of not going that route. When do you remember how you felt when you found out that nothing was going to happen to him besides the restraining order?
It was terrifying. When I was first brought to the Child Advocacy Center when I was 13, I remember leaving the interview and asking my mom, will I ever have to see him again, for one? And two, is this going to happen to anyone else? I was so focused on it not happening to anyone else. I knew that I had support and I was protected by my parents and my loved ones. And I was so grateful for that, but I was so terrified for anyone else. And I still don't know to this day if it has happened to anyone else by him, but commonly it does happen to more than one. So I think that's kind of haunted me a little bit. And at times has made me feel guilty, I guess, for not putting more effort into seeking justice. But at the same time, I know that I did what's best for me. And, now I kind of think that doing this podcast and my online presence about this is like my way of seeking justice and helping others. So.
Yeah, and that's great. That you decided to take this into your own control, because a lot of times those things happen to us and we feel like we don't have any control over it. But, I'm glad that you were allowed to decide how you wanted to seek justice for yourself, and how you want to do that. And the podcast and things of that nature, and talking to people and advocating for survivors and providing insight on your experience. I think that that's commendable, and it's very encouraging to see it, but there's also a bit of bravery in there as well too, so that as people recognize and hear your experience, hopefully that continues, and it probably has provided someone else that encouragement to speak out, because there's a lot of 13-year-old or 9-year-old Mackenzies out there that have experienced that same trauma. So I'm glad that you are able to seek that justice, and you're getting that on your own time. If there's ever a time where you're welcome, more than welcome. So how is life now? How are you doing now?
Oh, good question. So, I I have really, healed a lot. I've been on a healing journey. I'd say I started at 17, I'm now 24.
Mm,
And, you know, the thing with childhood sexual trauma or any trauma, like we said, it's going to have lifelong impacts. And it's
mhm,
something that you're going to have to learn how to live with and move forward with. It's not something you can just get over or, forget about. So I do definitely still struggle with anxiety, depression, PTSD, all of these things. However,
mm,
I've really been able to figure out the coping mechanisms that work for me, curate a support system around me that I can lean on, a
mhm,
support system within myself with my own self-compassion, I think has been
mhm,
one of the most influential things, is really, really trying my best to be my best friend instead of being my own enemy in this. And, I am honestly living my dream. I've always wanted to live in California.
mhm,
I am helping other survivors. I've always, kind of wanted to be that person I never had growing up,
mhm,
because listening to other survivors growing up, and there weren't that many that I could find, but every story I listened to was so impactful and so helpful in making me feel less alone. And so
mhm.
I'd say overall, like, I'm doing really lovely. Like, I love
Great.
living, I love existing. I'm just excited for the future, and I want to show other survivors the reality of being a survivor, but also which comes with the hard times, but it's also so beautiful. Like, we're able to really empathize with others on a deeper level, and
Mhm.
um, yeah, just able to handle future adversity more elegantly, I think, through our healing. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. There's one other thing I wanted to ask you about. You just mentioned self-compassion. Can you dive into what that looks like?
yeah, self-compassion. So, with any type of trauma or other mental illnesses, I think that we can be really hard on ourselves because,
Mhm,
we're not acting like normal people or people who don't
mhm.
have these type of adversities. And it, I'm so sorry if you hear the banging.
Oh, it's okay. I don't hear anything.
Okay, great. Sorry. Edit that
It's
out.
okay.
um, and I think that basically showing ourselves compassion is a way to help us move forward better. There's
Mhm.
nothing worse than just beating yourself up. That doesn't get you anywhere. It makes things
Yeah.
worse. And I've tried that method for years and it hasn't worked. And it still comes up because of my old thought patterns coming and showing themselves. And I think, I don't know, yeah, rewiring your brain with self compassion, I think, is the most effective way to move forward on a healing journey. Just holding yourself, being that support within yourself and your best friend. How would you respond to your best friend? I think that's
Mhm.
self-compassion to me, is responding that way to yourself,
Yeah.
if that makes
Sounds
sense.
absolutely. It sounds like giving yourself some grace, right?
Yeah,
Where you can look back on things. Well, I should have done this and I should have done that. And if I hadn't have been this way, this wouldn't have happened to me. But at the same time, that was an age where, you didn't really have any control of things that were happening to you. And then there's all those like the developmental stages and things of that nature, the fear, the anxiety, the grooming and stuff like that, the manipulation, things of that nature, where someone could say, I could have been smarter. Well, you're 9 years old, and 12, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old at that time. So looking at self-compassion, I think it's a great way to give ourselves some grace and to reflect, but also have that compassion for ourselves, to make sure that we're able to heal and move forward on that healing journey.
yeah. And one other thing I would add is I think recognizing the duality of life, realizing that there's always going to be several perspectives. If you heard that one, but there's always going to be several perspectives to
Mhm,
whatever you experience. There's going to be the more negative perspective and the more positive perspective. And just because you focus on the positive perspective doesn't mean the negative one is negated. It's still
Right.
there, but I think it's more productive to focus on the more positive outlook, while also acknowledging the negative. If that makes sense. I think that's really helped
Absolutely.
me. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this is Mackenzie Mae. I told you she's one of the most inspiring people that you will come across. If someone wanted to follow you, how do they, or connect with you? How do they connect with you?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram. It's at Trauma Chats Podcast, or my podcast is called Trauma Chats with Mackenzie Mae, and it's available on all streaming platforms. So that's where you can reach me.
Absolutely. And I'll also put the links in the bio when we post the episode too as well. But this is I Am Conquering Mountains with the wonderful and inspiring Miss Mackenzie Mae. She has her own podcast called the Trauma Chats. Say it again. I'll edit that. I'll edit it out.
Trauma Chats with Mackenzie Mae.
Trauma Chats with Mackenzie Mae podcast. I can't wait to see the things that the future holds for you. What kind of things are you working on right now in regards to like your ambitions and things like that of what you want to do for survivors of child sex abuse?
Yeah, so at this time, I'm really focusing on my Instagram and kind of sharing information there, as well as, kind of getting an insight on what it's like to be a survivor. And in the future, I'm really wanting to interview other survivors, other people like yourself, even therapists,
Absolutely.
other mental health professionals. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have some people in mind that I can definitely recommend as well too from
Oh, lovely.
doing interviews on the podcast.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Well, this is I Am Conquering Mountains. Wonderful, wonderful conversation with Miss Mackenzie Mae. You've heard how you can find her. Make sure that you look into the bio, find her social media, her podcast, and things of that nature. Make sure you follow her. I can't wait to see what the future holds for her. I feel like there's going to be a book or something coming out at some point that I can't wait to get a hold of. Because she is so inspiring. You offer so much great insight for children who are enduring child sex abuse, as well as those who are adults who are survivors of it as well too. So I'm thankful that Miss Mackenzie Mae joined us today.
Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm so grateful, and it was so lovely chatting with you.
Absolutely. Till next time, this is I Am Conquering Mountains podcast, where we're focusing on the theme of I am conquering childhood trauma. See you next time. God bless. All right. Hang on while I stop the recording.
Okay.